Some men become legends because of talent, others because of luck. But David Letterman became a legend for a reason far heavier. He survived everything life tried to break him with. From childhood nights spent fearing his father wouldn't live until morning, to the disappointment that shattered his dreams, to scandals, heart surgery, betrayals, and dangers no one saw coming, he kept rising. He kept standing. He kept showing up for millions, even when the storms inside him were louder than the applause outside. This is not the story of a comedian. This is the story of a man who walked through fear, heartbreak, humiliation, triumph, and near tragedy, yet somehow found peace, purpose, and love in the final chapters of his life. If David Letterman ever made you laugh, comforted you on a lonely night, or showed you what resilience truly looks like, this is the journey behind the man you thought you knew. Some stories begin with ambition. His began with a heartbeat that could stop at any moment. David Letterman was born in Indianapolis, a simple Midwestern city where families lived quiet lives and everyone knew their neighbors. His childhood home was modest, nothing fancy, but it carried the feeling of a normal American family trying to live peacefully. The streets around him were calm, the kind where children rode bikes, people waved from porches, and life seemed steady on the surface. But inside his home, the atmosphere was different. There was a quiet tension that followed the family every day. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the kind of fear that settled into the walls, into the routines, into the way everyone spoke and moved. His father, Harry, worked as a florist. He was gentle, respectful, and soft in his manner. People liked him because he was kind, but inside the house, everyone lived with the knowledge that something was wrong with his health. Harry had serious heart problems long before modern medicine knew how to control such conditions. He had already survived heart attacks, and every day carried the possibility of another one. His mother, Dorothy, was strong and disciplined. She kept the house organized, the children steady, and tried to create a sense of normality. But even she could not remove the thought that any moment her husband's heart might fail. David had an older sister and a younger sister. The children laughed, played, and tried to enjoy childhood, but the fear never fully left them. They learned early that life could change in a single second. Even when they were smiling, the thought of their father suddenly collapsing stayed in the background of their minds. For David, this fear shaped him deeply. It pushed him to become watchful, always alert, always listening for sounds in the house that might mean trouble. He went to bed listening for his father's breathing and woke up doing the same. That kind of responsibility at a young age leaves a mark on a child, and it certainly did on him. School was difficult in a quiet way. He wasn't bullied or mistreated, but he felt like he didn't truly belong. He walked through hallways without being noticed, keeping to himself, often lost in thought. Teachers saw him as shy. Other students saw him as quiet. He didn't raise his hand often, didn't push himself into conversations, and didn't try to stand out. Part of his mind was always back home, wondering if everything was okay. It's hard for a child to be fully present at school when he grows up fearing he could lose his father at any time. After school, David took small jobs, stocking shelves, delivering goods, doing whatever tasks he could manage. These jobs didn't pay much, but he learned early how much effort it took just to keep life stable. Money was not the main issue in his family, but they lived carefully. Every decision was made with caution because medical problems were always waiting on the horizon. Watching this taught him a practical form of responsibility, the idea that nothing could be wasted, nothing could be taken for granted, and everything had to be earned. In the middle of all this fear and pressure, humor quietly entered his life. He found that jokes made people relax. They made his mother smile after a difficult night. They made the atmosphere in the home feel lighter, even if only for a moment. Humor didn't come from confidence. It came from the need to escape his own thoughts. When he made someone laugh, for a second he could forget the anxiety that followed him everywhere. He wasn't trying to become a comedian. He was simply trying to cope, to breathe, to feel a little safer. His jokes were fast, sharp, and unexpected, not because he wanted attention, but because his mind was always searching for ways to break the tension around him. But humor did not erase the insecurity underneath. He often felt unsure of himself. He doubted his abilities, questioned whether he was enough, and wondered if he had anything special to offer the world. Growing up with constant fear creates a habit of doubting the future. It makes you believe that good things might not last, that danger might always be waiting. These early feelings stayed with him, shaping how he reacted to success, failure, and every challenge that came later. Even as a young teenager, he carried the weight of responsibilities that most children never have to face. These early years formed the emotional blueprint that he would carry for the rest of his life. The hyper-awareness, the overthinking, the habit of scanning rooms for tension, the fear of losing everything without warning, all of it came from childhood. His humor, which later made him famous, was born from fear rather than confidence. His drive to succeed came not from ambition, but from a deep desire to build a life where he didn't have to worry every moment. His introversion, his sensitivity, his sharp observations, all of it grew from those quiet nights listening for the sound of his father's heartbeat. He learned to survive emotionally by staying alert, by staying ready for bad news, by expecting the unexpected. The combination of a loving home, constant medical danger, and emotional caution shaped a young boy into someone who would later use humor as both a shield and a tool. These early experiences did not feel extraordinary at the time. They felt normal to him because they were all he knew. But they were shaping him in ways he wouldn't fully understand until decades later. And just as he began learning how to live with fear, fate delivered the blow he had dreaded since childhood. The moment that changes a man forever often arrives without warning. For David Letterman, that moment came when he was just 26 years old. His father, Harry, the man whose fragile heart had controlled the rhythm of the entire household, suddenly collapsed from a fatal heart attack. There was no long goodbye, no final conversation, no time to prepare. One moment Harry was tending to his flowers, and the next he was gone. For a son who had lived his entire childhood listening for danger, the silence that followed was heavier than anything he had ever known. The news hit him like a force he couldn't understand. David didn't cry openly at first. He sat in a stunned, empty, quiet, unable to process that the heart he had spent years monitoring had stopped forever. For so long he had feared this ending, but knowing it could happen didn't make the pain any easier. It broke something inside him, something that had held him together during the constant nights of worry. Losing his father didn't just hurt his heart, it changed the shape of his world. It left him with an emptiness that he didn't know how to fill. The loss hit him deeper because it confirmed the fear he had carried since childhood that he, too, might not live long. The idea of dying young stayed with him like a shadow. He often wondered if his father's fate was waiting for him as well. At that age, most young adults feel the world opening up. But for David, the world suddenly looked smaller, shorter, and more fragile. He made a private promise to himself, a promise he didn't say out loud, but felt deeply. He wanted to outrun his father's fate. He wanted to build something meaningful before time ran out. Grief moved through him in unexpected ways. Some people become quiet, and some collapse. David turned his grief into movement. Instead of slowing down, he pushed harder. He became more determined to build a life where he wouldn't feel helpless. But this ambition came with anxiety. He became anxious about failure, scared of wasted time, and pressured by the thought that every year mattered more than it should. When you think death is always near, you rush through life trying to stay ahead of it. This fear became both his motivation and his burden. During this time, he stayed focused on college at Ball State University. College gave him structure. It gave him a place to channel the restless energy inside him. He studied broadcasting, worked part-time jobs, and tried to find stability in routine. But even in the most ordinary moments, the memory of his father stayed with him. When he sat in a classroom, he thought about time. When he walked across campus, he wondered if he would live long enough to see his own future clearly. These thoughts never fully left him. He worked at the university's student-run radio station, WBST. Broadcasting felt natural to him. He liked the connection, the communication, the chance to use humor as a way to feel lighter. But even here, in a place where he thought he belonged, he hit his first painful setback. He was fired for making jokes during a classical music program. It was a small offense to others, but to him it felt like a sign that he wasn't good enough. His confidence took a hit, and the old doubt returned stronger than before. He wondered if his father's death had created an emotional hole he couldn't fill. Still, he kept searching for direction. During this period, he started building a relationship with Michelle Cook, a young woman who became his first real partner in adulthood. Their connection grew slowly, shaped by the simple life they shared. They married young, more out of love and support than out of a clear plan for the future. For David, Michelle represented comfort and steadiness. She was someone who believed in him when he doubted himself. Their early married life was built around small apartments, simple meals, and long talks about what their future might look like. But even as he built this new life, he felt restless. The grief of losing his father was still unprocessed, and it pushed him forward in unpredictable ways. He began to feel that staying in a predictable routine would trap him. He didn't want to live a quiet life that ended too soon. He wanted more, even if he didn't know exactly what more meant. This feeling grew stronger with every passing month. He wanted a career that mattered, something that would outlast him. Broadcasting seemed like a path he could follow, but he knew that staying comfortable would never take him where he wanted to go. He took small steps forward, trying local broadcasting jobs, practicing his voice, learning the basics of television work, but each step came with doubt. His early failures shook him more deeply than he admitted. Every time someone dismissed him, he felt the weight of his father's death pressing on him again. He didn't just fear failure, he feared running out of time to succeed. This pressure made him more serious, more focused, and more determined to break away from the life he knew. Eventually, he realized he couldn't stay in the same city, working the same small jobs, living the same predictable pattern. The fear of living a life that felt too small became stronger than the fear of leaving everything behind. He understood that he needed to take a risk, even a frightening one. He needed to step away from the familiar and move towards something unknown. He wanted to find a place where he could prove to himself that he was more than the quiet boy who grew up listening for danger in his home. So he made the decision that would shape the rest of his life. He decided to leave the safety of Indiana behind and search for a future far beyond the world he had always known. But even as he tried to outrun the memory of death, a new disappointment awaited him, one that would cut even deeper. Success doesn't begin with applause, it begins with the echo of doors slamming shut. After losing his father and trying to build a steady adult life, David Letterman stepped into the next stage of his journey, his first real job in front of a camera. He became a weatherman for an Indianapolis television station. It sounded simple, almost funny, but for him, it was a chance to try something new. He tried to add humor to his weather reports because he didn't know how else to hide his nervousness. Sometimes he joked about imaginary cities or made comments that didn't fit the script. Some viewers laughed, but others called him strange. His co-workers were unsure about his style. A few thought he was talented, but many thought he was too odd, too unpredictable, too awkward. Every laugh he earned felt followed by two confused looks. It was a strange time. He was doing something he liked, but he didn't feel respected. He didn't feel understood, and he certainly didn't feel he was building a real future. The more he worked, the more he sensed that people around him didn't see him as someone serious. They saw him as a joke, someone who didn't fit the traditional mold. Being underestimated every day slowly wore him down. He started to feel trapped, like he was stuck in a small box that kept getting smaller. He wasn't sure who he was becoming, but he was sure that this wasn't the life he wanted. He knew there was something in him, some mix of humor, observation, and sensitivity that didn't belong in a simple weather segment. Then came the humiliation that pushed him over the edge. One day he realized that no matter how hard he tried to fit in, people still saw him as strange or out of place. It wasn't one big event, but a collection of smaller moments. Eye rolls from coworkers, complaints from viewers, producers questioning his choices. It was the feeling of knowing that you don't belong, even when you try your best. That quiet pain shook him. He understood that if he didn't make a bold move, he might spend the rest of his life stuck in a job that felt too small for his mind and too heavy for his heart. During this period, his marriage to Michelle also began to feel strained. They had married young, full of hope and dreams, but life was changing quickly. He was spending more time working and worrying, and less time being present at home. Michelle didn't always understand the pressure he felt. She wanted stability. He wanted something bigger, but he didn't know how to explain it. Their conversations grew shorter, their distance grew wider, and the more he tried to hide his inner conflict, the more disconnected they became. Neither of them was a bad person. They were simply growing in different directions. The tension became a silent guest in their home, always present, never fully addressed. Eventually, the emotional drift became too deep to ignore. David realized that staying in the marriage would only lead to more unhappiness for both of them. It was a painful decision, but it was honest. Their separation wasn't angry or dramatic. It was sad and quiet. Two young people who once believed love was enough discovered that sometimes love alone cannot carry a life forward. Ending the marriage left David with guilt and confusion, but also with a sense that he needed to start over completely. So, with his marriage ending and his job offering no real future, he made a choice that would change his life forever. In 1975, at age 28, he packed his belongings into a rusted, unreliable car and drove to Los Angeles. He had no real connections, no guarantees, and barely enough money to survive a few months. The drive itself felt like a test. He wasn't confident, he wasn't excited, he was scared. But fear was familiar to him, and he had learned long ago how to move forward even when he didn't feel ready. Los Angeles welcomed him with indifference. It was a city filled with thousands of dreamers just like him. People who wanted careers in entertainment. People who wanted to be seen. In that crowd, he was invisible again. He started performing stand-up at the Comedy Store, a famous but brutally competitive club. Many nights, the room was half empty. Some nights, no one laughed. Some nights, people didn't even look up from their drinks. He felt alone in a way he never had before. The laughter he once used to keep his fears quiet now felt impossible to reach. The loneliness hit him hardest. He didn't have friends in the city. He didn't have a support system. He barely had enough money to pay rent, and often skipped meals to make sure he could keep the lights on. He took any job he could find, writing jokes for other performers, doing small game shows that no one remembered, accepting low-budget TV work that barely paid enough to survive. Each job gave him just enough money to scrape by for another week. It was survival, not success. But the hardest moment came with the audition for the movie Airplane in 1980. It could have been a major turning point in his career. Instead, it became a disaster. He performed poorly. He was nervous, awkward, and unable to deliver the lines in a way that fit the movie's style. When he left the room, he knew he hadn't even come close. The humiliation hit him deeply. He stood outside in the bright California sun, feeling exposed and defeated. For a moment, he believed he had reached the end of his path. He wondered if he had made a mistake moving to Los Angeles. He wondered if he belonged anywhere at all. The failure made him question everything, his talent, his decisions, his future. It was one of the lowest points in his life. But on the very night he thought destiny had abandoned him, destiny was quietly preparing his breakthrough. Sometimes, All it takes is one man's belief to ignite another man's destiny. After years of struggling in Los Angeles, performing in mostly empty rooms and barely surviving on small writing jobs, something finally shifted. A few talent scouts from The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, had seen him perform. It wasn't a packed night, it wasn't his best set. But they noticed something different about him. His timing was unusual, his humor was unpredictable, and his awkwardness seemed strangely honest. While many comedians tried too hard to impress, David's nervous, sharp-witted style stood out. The scouts passed his name along, and soon he got the call that every young comedian dreamed of. He would appear on The Tonight Show. When the day came, he was terrified. The Tonight Show stage was the most important stage in American comedy. It was the place where careers were made or destroyed in minutes. Walking onto that stage felt like stepping into another world. The lights were bright, the cameras cold, and the audience larger than any he had ever faced. His heart raced, his hands shook, and he struggled to steady his voice. But once he began speaking, something clicked. His timing worked. His jokes landed. His awkward charm, so misunderstood for years, was suddenly the thing that made the audience laugh. When Johnny Carson himself invited him over to the desk afterward, it was more than an honor. It was a signal. Sitting at Carson's desk meant you had arrived. That moment changed everything. Carson rarely showed open approval to new comedians, but with David, he showed trust and admiration. Carson liked him. He liked the odd humor, the dry comments, the way David could make something ordinary sound hilarious. That approval meant more than anything. For years, David had lived with doubt and fear, but this was the first time someone at the highest level said, without words, "You belong here." It lifted something heavy off his shoulders. It made him believe that maybe his struggles in Los Angeles had a purpose. More invitations followed. He appeared on the show several times, each time earning stronger reactions. Carson became a quiet supporter, and the industry noticed. People who had ignored David now wanted to work with him. Producers, agents, and network executives began to see him as a rising star. The excitement grew fast. He got small TV opportunities, wrote more, performed more, and slowly became a recognizable face. The pressure grew too. He didn't want to disappoint Carson. He didn't want to lose this rare chance. Every new appearance felt like a test he had to pass. Then NBC offered him something unexpected, his own show. They were launching a new late-night program at 12:30 a.m. after Carson's show, and they wanted David Letterman to host it. In 1982, Late Night with David Letterman premiered. It wasn't a typical talk show. It wasn't meant to follow the usual rules. David approached it with the same odd humor that had once confused people in Indianapolis. He didn't want to copy Carson. He wanted to do something different, something that felt natural to him, and he did. He brought a new style of comedy, unusual skits, unpredictable segments, strange stunts, and humor that felt more spontaneous than polished. He made fun of himself. He made fun of television. He even made fun of the guests sometimes, which was unheard of. He didn't try to be charming. He didn't try to impress everyone. He simply allowed his natural weirdness to become part of the show, and people loved it. The audience reaction was strong and immediate. Younger viewers connected with him. They liked his honesty, his sarcasm, and his refusal to act like a perfect host. Older viewers didn't always understand him, but even they kept watching because the show felt different. It felt alive. It felt like anything could happen. Soon, a cult following formed. People stayed up late just to see what strange thing he would do next. He threw things off the roof of the building, interviewed random people on the street, and created segments that felt almost too silly for television. But that silliness became his identity. It made him unforgettable. With success came pressure. The workload grew heavier every month. Writing new material for a daily show demanded endless creativity. There were days he felt empty, days he felt like he had nothing funny left inside him. The pressure to perform night after night sometimes overwhelmed him. Panic attacks began creeping into his life. Before shows, he sometimes felt unable to breathe. He feared failure constantly. Even after earning fame, the fear planted in his childhood followed him. He didn't want to disappoint the audience. He didn't want to lose what he had built. He didn't want to waste the opportunity Carson had given him. Self-doubt became a quiet companion. Some nights he would walk onto the stage feeling confident. Other nights he felt like an imposter pretending to be someone he wasn't. But no matter how he felt inside, he pushed through. He delivered jokes, asked questions, entertained millions, and kept reinventing the show. The emotional cracks showed themselves privately, not publicly. On stage he was sharp, funny, and unpredictable. Off stage he lived with pressure, fear, and exhaustion. The success he had dreamed about came with a price he had never expected. By the mid-1980 seconds and into the early 1990 seconds, David Letterman was becoming more than a host. He was becoming a legend. People admired his originality. Networks saw him as the future. His show grew stronger each year, and his influence spread across television. Everyone believed that when Johnny Carson eventually retired, David Letterman would take his place. It seemed natural. It seemed guaranteed. The audience expected it. The industry expected it. Even Carson himself seemed to support the idea. Yet, just as he reached the height of promise, the throne everyone believed was his suddenly slipped from his grasp. History promised him the crown, but history chose someone else. By the early 1990 seconds, David Letterman had become a major force in late-night television. Viewers, critics, and most of Hollywood believed that when Johnny Carson finally retired from The Tonight Show, David would naturally take over. For years, this idea was repeated everywhere. Carson admired him, the audience loved him, and almost everyone assumed he was the rightful successor. People spoke about it as if it were already decided. It felt like the next chapter of his life was waiting for him. When Carson announced his retirement, excitement filled the industry. Newspapers printed predictions that David would be the next host. TV critics wrote long pieces explaining why he was the perfect choice. Even casual viewers talked about how it was obvious he would sit behind the famous desk next. David himself allowed a small part of his heart to hope. He didn't brag or assume anything, but deep inside, he felt this might finally be the moment that proved he truly belonged at the top. But behind the scenes, something entirely different was happening. NBC executives were having private conversations about the future of the show. They were afraid that Jay Leno, another popular comedian, might leave the network if he didn't get the job. Business concerns started to matter more than loyalty or tradition. Quiet meetings, closed-door discussions, and nervous negotiations took place without David knowing. While the world saw him as the destined heir, NBC was making plans that pointed in another direction. Then the news broke suddenly, without warning. NBC announced that Jay Leno, not David Letterman, would take over The Tonight Show. The shock spread instantly. Reporters couldn't believe it. Fans were confused. Hollywood reacted with disbelief. People thought it was a mistake. They assumed the network would reverse the decision. But they didn't. The choice was final. For David, the pain was personal. He had spent years building a career with honesty and originality. He had worked hard, taken risks, and earned Carson's respect. Now, all at once, the dream he had quietly carried for so long slipped out of reach. He didn't scream or complain publicly. He didn't attack the network. Instead, he showed dignity. He went to work as usual. He delivered jokes. He interviewed guests. But inside, he was heartbroken. Losing the job wasn't just a professional disappointment, it was an emotional wound. It felt like someone had taken something that belonged to him. Friends later said they saw a heaviness in him during that time. He looked tired, distant, and quieter than usual. Some nights, right before walking on stage, he would stand alone for a moment, gathering enough strength to face the camera. He hid his pain well, but those close to him could tell he was struggling. The world celebrated the excitement of Leno taking over, but very few people understood what it felt like for David to keep performing every night while grieving a dream that had been taken from him. Ratings tensions increased. Entertainment magazines compared him to Leno constantly. Fans argued about who deserved the show more. The industry seemed divided, but David didn't fight publicly. He simply kept working, even though every show reminded him of the opportunity he lost. In private, he questioned himself. He wondered if he had failed, if he wasn't good enough, or if he had misunderstood his place in the world. These thoughts added weight to an already painful situation. Then something unexpected happened. CBS began to notice his value. They recognized that NBC's decision was not a sign of weakness. It was a mistake. CBS executives approached him with a remarkable offer: his own show, a massive contract, and a chance to build something new. They offered him full creative control and the prestigious Ed Sullivan Theater in New York. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was a statement. It was validation. It was a network saying, "You were worth more than they realized." David accepted the offer, and in 1993, The Late Show with David Letterman premiered on CBS. The response was immediate. Crowds lined up around the block. The ratings were strong. Critics praised the show's fresh energy. People tuned in every night to see how he would reinvent late night once again. He brought the same sharp humor, the same unpredictability, and the same honesty that had made him successful before. But now there was something deeper in his work. He had something to prove, not out of anger, but out of a quiet determination to show that he belonged at the top. With each episode, the show grew stronger. His jokes hit harder. His interviews felt more confident. His style matured into something that felt both familiar and completely new. CBS had given him freedom, and he used it to build a show that reflected who he truly was. Over time, he became a symbol of reinvention and resilience. He didn't get the crown he expected, but he built his own throne instead. Still, the scars from the rejection didn't disappear. Even in success, a part of him remembered the pain of being overlooked. The wound didn't define him, but it stayed with him, shaping him quietly. It made him more sensitive, more thoughtful, and sometimes more guarded. But it also gave him a strength he didn't know he had the strength to rise again. He had rebuilt his career, regained his confidence, and proven that he could succeed without NBC. But just when victory felt finally reclaimed, the woman who had shaped his brilliance slipped slowly out of his life. Success can lift a man higher than he ever dreamed, but love is what reminds him how far he can fall. After the shock of losing The Tonight Show, David Letterman leaned harder than ever on the one person who had been beside him through the most important years of his career, Meryl Markoe. She wasn't just his girlfriend. She was his creative partner, the person who understood his humor better than anyone, and the one who helped shape the early voice of his show. They wrote together, worked together, and built ideas late into the night. She saw sides of him no one else did: his worry, his insecurity, his strange humor, his fear of failure. Meryl was the person he trusted when the world felt too loud. But the same career that brought them close slowly pushed them apart. As the pressure of fame grew, the workload became heavier. David had to show up every night with energy, jokes, and perfect timing, no matter how he felt inside. The long hours, the constant stress, and the need to always be on drained him. By the time he got home, he often felt empty. Meryl, who had once been his closest companion, began to feel the distance. It wasn't anger, it wasn't neglect. It was simply the quiet heaviness that enters a relationship when one person is consumed by a world the other cannot fully share. Their bond began to weaken in small, quiet ways. Conversations became shorter. Their laughter didn't come as easily. Stress sat between them like a third person neither could remove. Meryl later said she felt him slipping into a future she wasn't sure she was part of. David, in his own way, didn't fully understand what was happening. He was trying to survive the demands of the show, trying to manage his insecurities, trying to stay afloat emotionally. But in the process, he didn't see how much she needed him. The breakup didn't come with a fight. It came with silence. They simply reached a point where they knew they could not continue the way they were living. Ending a 10-year relationship left both of them hurting. Meryl had poured her heart and talent into their life together. David had relied on her more than he ever said out loud. Losing each other felt like losing a part of themselves. Even though they continued working together for a while, something inside their relationship had already changed. The pain was quiet but deep. The breakup didn't happen because they stopped caring. It happened because life pushed them in different directions until they could no longer walk side by side. Around this time, a woman named Regina Lasco entered David's life. She didn't arrive suddenly or dramatically. She entered his world gently, quietly. She worked in the television environment, so she understood the long hours and strange pressures that came with the job. She didn't try to replace Meryl. She didn't push herself into his life. Instead, she simply existed nearby, calm, steady, patient. Little by little, David found himself drawn to her presence. It wasn't a fast, fiery romance. It was slow, cautious, and uncertain. After the pain of his previous relationships, he didn't trust himself easily. David was older than Regina by many years, and that difference made him hesitant. He worried about repeating old mistakes. He worried about hurting someone again. He worried about building something that might fall apart. Regina didn't demand answers from him. She didn't rush him. She understood that he was carrying old wounds. Their connection grew through small moments, conversations, shared routines, quiet evenings. She provided something he didn't know he needed, a sense of calm. Her presence didn't erase his fears, but it softened them. Their early years together were filled with tenderness, but also with cracks underneath. David was still working non-stop. The demands of late-night television didn't allow for a normal life. Regina often found herself alone at home while he worked into the night. She accepted this reality because she loved him, but the loneliness still affected her. She knew loving him meant sharing him with millions of people who watched him every night. She didn't complain, but she felt the distance that fame naturally creates in a relationship. David, meanwhile, leaned on Regina more than he realized. She helped him stay grounded when anxiety overwhelmed him. She gave him emotional comfort on days he felt uncertain. But he also struggled with the guilt of not being fully present. He knew he was asking her to accept a life filled with long hours and emotional inconsistency. Some days, he came home exhausted, unable to offer more than a few words. Other days, he tried to make up for it with kindness and humor. Their life together was full of love, yet shaped by the realities of a career that allowed little rest. As the years passed, they stayed together through ups and downs, but the question of starting a family remained uncertain. They were together for a long time without children, partly because of age, partly because life kept moving too fast. David quietly carried the fear that he might never become a father. Regina also felt the weight of waiting. They had built a life together, but the future still felt unsure. There were moments of hope, moments of disappointment, and moments when they both wondered if parenthood would ever be part of their story. Then, at a time when they had almost stopped expecting it, everything changed. Their son, Harry, was born in 2003. David was 56 years old, and Regina was 43. Becoming parents at such a late stage in life felt almost unreal. The moment they held their son, they felt something shift inside them. David looked at the tiny baby in his arms and felt emotions he had never felt before: love, fear, gratitude, and hope all at once. Regina watched him soften in ways she had never seen during all their years together. Their son was a miracle they thought might never arrive. But the moment their son finally arrived, the miracle they never expected would soon bring danger closer than either imagined. Becoming a father gave him a new heartbeat, but it also gave the world a new way to wound him. When David Letterman held his son, Harry, for the first time in 2003, something inside him changed instantly. He was in his mid-50s, long past the age when most men expect to become first-time fathers. But the moment he looked at the tiny face staring back at him, every fear, every regret, every insecurity softened. He had spent decades worrying he might die young like his father, and now he had a reason to fight for every extra year. Harry became his purpose. The late-night pressure, the career wounds, the old emotional scars, everything felt smaller when he held his son. He wanted to be the father he never got to have for long. He wanted to survive long enough for his boy to remember him. But becoming a father didn't just fill his heart, it filled his life with a new kind of fear, a fear of losing something he had waited so long to receive. And that fear became real in 2005, when he learned about a plan to kidnap his 6-month-old son and demand a $5 million ransom. The man behind the plot worked at the family's home and intended to take Harry from the very place that was supposed to be safest. The threat was stopped before anything happened, but knowing how close danger had come left a mark that never faded. The news shook David to his core. It wasn't fame that scared him. Fame had always brought pressure and problems, but this was different. This was his child, his only child. The one thing he thought life had finally given him without taking something in return. For weeks after the plot was uncovered, he found himself standing by the door at night, checking locks again and again. He would wake up just to look at Harry sleeping, reassuring himself that he was safe. The fear felt personal, like the universe had found the one thing he could not bear to lose. Regina felt it too. She watched her husband unravel quietly, slipping between relief and paranoia. The kidnapping plan changed them both. They became more protective, more careful, more aware that the world could turn dangerous without warning. 2 years later, David and Regina married in a small, private ceremony in Montana. They had already been together for more than 20 years. Marriage wasn't about proving anything. It was about holding on to the family they had built, especially after the fear they had faced. The wedding was simple and quiet, the kind of moment that mattered only to the two people exchanging vows. For David, it was a way to honor Regina's loyalty, patience, and strength. She had stayed through every high and low. She had given him a son. She had kept their world steady, even when he felt unsteady himself. But the peace didn't last. In 2009, their marriage, so newly strengthened, was tested in a way neither expected. A man attempted to extort David for $2 million, claiming he had proof of David's past relationships with women who worked on his show. It was information David had kept private, even from Regina. When the extortion threat arrived, he had two choices: pay the money and hide the truth, or come forward publicly and face the consequences. He chose the truth. On October 1st, 2009, David sat behind his desk at the Late Show, looking more shaken than the world had ever seen him. His voice trembled as he admitted to the audience that he had been involved with women on his staff. He didn't make excuses. He didn't hide behind humor. He confessed with raw honesty, knowing the world would judge him and his family would hurt. The audience sat in stunned silence. Viewers across the country were shocked. Headlines exploded. News shows replayed his confession over and over. It became one of the most public self-exposures in late-night history. But the real pain didn't come from strangers' opinions. It came from the look on Regina's face when she heard the news. She had stood by him for decades, trusted him, and built a family with him. Now, she had to face the truth that he had broken that trust. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She simply pulled away. The distance in their home felt colder than any winter. Some nights, she slept in another room. Some days, she barely spoke. David felt the weight of guilt in every corner of the house. He had always been afraid of losing what he loved most, and now he faced the possibility that his own choices might cost him the family he had waited so long to have. The extortionist was arrested soon after, but that didn't repair the damage inside their home. Healing didn't come quickly. It came in small steps, silent breakfasts, difficult conversations, apologies repeated in different ways. David tried to show through actions, not words, that he was committed to change. Regina tried to give herself space without walking away completely. Their marriage became a slow rebuild, fragile, uncertain, but not hopeless. Over time, they began to find their footing again. Not because the past disappeared, but because they refused to let it destroy them. Regina chose to stay, not out of weakness, but out of courage. She chose to protect her family, even while healing her own heart. David, humbled, learned the difference between saying he loved his family and showing it. The scandal didn't break them, it remade them. Their bond became quieter, more careful, more honest. They survived because forgiveness, real forgiveness, is not a moment, it is a daily decision. For the public, the scandal soon faded. For David and Regina, it became a private reminder of what it meant to fight for a family. They stayed together, grew older together, and rebuilt their life piece by piece. But just when the world thought the worst was behind him, the ghost he had feared since childhood returned for him. There are wounds you can escape, and there are wounds written in your blood. For most of his life, David Letterman carried the quiet fear that he might share the same fate as his father. The fear never fully left him, even during the best years of his career. As he approached his mid-50s, small warning signs began to appear. He sometimes felt tightness in his chest after long days at the studio. There were moments backstage when he needed to pause, take a slow breath, and steady himself. He brushed these signs away, telling himself it was stress or exhaustion from hosting a nightly show. He had lived with anxiety for so long that he didn't always know how to separate fear from real danger. Instead of seeking help, he pushed forward. Work came first, deadlines came first, the show came first. His health, as always, came last. But in early 2000, those signs could no longer be ignored. During a routine checkup, doctors noticed something concerning and sent him for more tests. The results were alarming. David had severe arterial blockage so serious that he needed immediate surgery. Not someday, not a few months later, but right away. The words felt like a punch to the chest. Suddenly, every childhood memory rushed back the nights he lay awake, listening for his father's breathing, the ambulance sirens, the fear of waking up to terrible news. He had spent a lifetime trembling at the idea of dying young, just like his father. Now, the doctors were telling him that the danger was real. When he heard the diagnosis, he didn't try to act brave. He was scared, truly scared. The fear wasn't about fame or missing a show. It was about his wife and his little boy. Harry was only a toddler, too young to understand that his father might not come home. Regina tried to stay calm, but her voice shook when she asked questions. She held David's hand tightly in the hospital room, as if her grip alone could keep him alive. Seeing her face made the situation feel even more real. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting to be a father, a husband, and a man who still had time left. The night before the surgery was one of the longest nights of his life. The hospital room was dim and quiet. Machines beeped softly. Nurses passed through the hallways. David lay awake, unable to stop thinking. He thought about his father lying in a similar bed decades earlier. He wondered if his father had felt the same fear. He thought about Harry's small hands and how he might grow up without remembering him. He thought about Regina and how much she had endured beside him. He thought about the years he had wasted worrying, the mistakes he had made, the nights when he pushed himself too hard. Facing the possibility of death forces a man to look at his life without excuses. That night, David faced everything: his past, his regrets, his hopes, and the simple truth that he still wanted more time. The next morning, he was wheeled into the operating room for a quadruple bypass. The surgery was long and risky. A team of skilled surgeons worked for hours to clear the blockages and restore proper blood flow to his heart. Outside the operating room, Regina waited anxiously, praying for good news. Fans around the country were shocked when they learned he was undergoing major heart surgery. News stations reported updates. Viewers sent messages of support. People who had watched him for years felt as if someone they knew personally was fighting for his life. When the surgery was finally over, the doctors delivered the news that everyone hoped for. He had survived. The operation was successful. In the recovery room, David woke slowly, feeling a heavy pressure on his chest and a pain that made even small movements difficult. But he was alive. That alone felt like a gift. Regina sat beside him, holding his hand gently. She whispered, "You made it." And he let out a weak smile. Every breath hurt, but every breath mattered. Recovery was not easy. He had to learn patience, something he had never been good at. He couldn't rush back to work. He couldn't push himself like he used to. Simple things, walking, eating, sleeping, took effort. The experience humbled him. It softened him. It reminded him that strength isn't just about working hard. It's also about allowing yourself to heal. As he recovered, he reflected on how close he had come to losing everything. The fear he carried since childhood had become real, but he had survived. That fact alone changed him. After weeks of healing, he returned to television. His first show back became one of the most memorable nights in late-night history. When he walked onto the stage, the audience stood and applauded for several minutes. Some people in the crowd wiped tears from their eyes. They weren't celebrating a comedian, they were celebrating a man who had fought his way back to life. David introduced the surgeons who had saved him and called them heroes. It was a moment of pure gratitude, not showmanship. His voice shook with emotion. His smile was softer. Even the jokes that night were warm and grateful. Viewers across the country felt the sincerity in every word. That experience changed his relationship with his audience. People no longer saw him only as a sharp, sarcastic host. They saw him as a human being who had survived something frightening and returned with a deeper understanding of life. David himself became more reflective, more open about his fears, and more thankful for the chance to keep living. He continued to work, but with a different mindset. His family mattered more. His health mattered more. Life felt shorter, but also more precious. The surgery forced him to slow down and appreciate things he had ignored for years. It didn't erase his worries, but it gave him a second chance to live more fully. But as he healed from the wounds inside his chest, he now faced the question he had avoided his entire life. What comes after the spotlight? At the end of every storm, a man must finally decide what peace means. For David Letterman, peace did not arrive with applause or trophies. It came quietly, the way morning light enters a room without asking for permission. When he stepped away from late-night television after more than 3 decades, the world expected him to miss the noise, the pressure, the crowds. But he didn't. What surprised him most was how quickly the weight lifted. The beard he grew after retirement became a symbol of his new life, unrushed, unpolished, and finally free from the nightly demand to perform. He no longer woke up thinking about monologues or ratings. Instead, he started his mornings with slow walks, strong coffee, and the kind of silence he once feared. He learned to enjoy simple things that fame had pushed aside. Cooking breakfast, reading without a deadline, watching snow fall from the porch. His days became calmer, his voice softer, his heart more open to the things that mattered. His wealth tells the story of a man who worked harder than anyone realized. His North Salem estate stretches across more than 100 acres. It holds a restored farmhouse, a lake, horse barns, walking paths, and a converted barn where he keeps decades of old notes and memories from his career. His Montana ranch covers thousands of acres of open land, the place where he and Regina married. It has a log lodge, a stone fireplace, and views so wide they make the world feel endless. Over the years, he also owned properties in Manhattan and other areas, each piece reflecting a chapter of a life built from nothing. His investments, cars, motorcycles, art, and production assets together form a fortune worth hundreds of millions. But in his older years, he doesn't talk about money. He talks about time, how precious, how unpredictable, how easy it is to waste. What he rarely shares publicly is how much he gives away. His donations have funded heart research, environmental work, disaster relief, veteran support, and medical programs. Ball State University, his alma mater, has benefited from millions in scholarships, new facilities, and communication centers he helped build. He quietly helps small towns, struggling families, students, and local groups that few people ever hear about. Generosity became part of his private life, not his public image. He doesn't give for attention. He gives because surviving heart surgery, scandal, heartbreak, and fear taught him that helping others is the only form of wealth that lasts. His relationship with Regina today is shaped by everything they survived together. They are older, gentler, more patient. They no longer argue about small things. They no longer carry old wounds the same way. They live with the understanding that love is not perfect, it is persistent. It survives tears, distance, mistakes, forgiveness, and the long process of becoming better people. Regina remains the steady center of his life. She is the person who holds him together on difficult days, the one who understands his moods, his quiet moments, his fears, his jokes, and his silences. Their shared history is not neat, but it is strong. They built a life that weathered storms many couples would not survive. Fatherhood in older age changed him more deeply than fame ever did. Harry is now a young man, and David treasures every conversation they share. Their road trips, late-night talks, and quiet meals are moments he treats like gifts he almost didn't live long enough to receive. He often reflects on how different he is as a father than he would have been at a younger age. He listens more, he rushes less. He tries to guide without controlling. He tries to love without fear. And every time he looks at his son, he silently thanks life for giving him more years than he once expected. As he moved deeper into his 70s, he also began reflecting on the people who shaped him. He thinks about Carson, often the mentor who believed in him quietly, the man whose approval meant more to him than any award. He still feels the loss of his parents, especially his mother, who remained a steady voice of support until her final years. He sometimes remembers his past relationships not with regret, but with a softer understanding of who he was and who he became. He knows he wasn't always easy to love. He knows he didn't always communicate well. Age has made him gentler with himself and with the people he once hurt. That gentleness is one of the few rewards of getting older. From age 70 onward, fame looks very different to him. It is no longer a goal or a measure of success. It feels more like a memory, something he once chased, then mastered, then outgrew. He no longer wants the spotlight. He wants connection, purpose, and quiet. He enjoys appearing in interviews or special projects, but only when it feels meaningful. He does not miss the pressure of being funny on command. He does not miss the constant judgment of television critics. He does not miss pretending to be someone he wasn't. Retirement taught him that the world can move on without you, and that this is not something to fear. It is something to accept with grace. The wisdom he shares now is simpler than people expect. He talks about loving the people in your life before it's too late. He talks about forgiving yourself for the mistakes you made when you didn't know better. He talks about taking care of your body, because you only get one. He talks about slowing down, listening more, appreciating the small moments. He talks about resilience, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that helps you stand back up after life knocks you down. He wants people to know that pain does not end you, that mistakes do not define you, and that there is always time to choose a new direction. His legacy is not just the jokes or the interviews. It's the lesson that life can be rebuilt, even after heartbreak, disappointment, or fear. As he grows older, his steps are slower. His days are quieter. His focus is not on fame, but on meaning. The chapter he is living now is built on gratitude, family, health, and the hope that he still has time left to enjoy the life he fought so hard to keep. And as his footsteps grow softer and the lights fade gently behind him, one question remains, the one only time can answer.